Let's start with the Mail's front page. Yet another Labour plan to go soft on criminals. As Susanna was saying, this is basically, currently, if a prisoner's out on licence, on parole, and they breach the terms of the licence, they're slammed back inside and they have to serve the rest of the sentence that's yet been spent. Under these plans, they'd only get 28 days inside and then they'd be released again. And presumably the same thing would happen if they breached their parole a second time. This is causing outrage.
Sure.
What's your take on it, Kwasi?
So, look, I think clearly the government's thinking, well, you know, we don't have enough prison spaces. We've got to make sure that it's, you know, we've got enough room to put prisoners in. Mm-hmm. But, of course, the optics of that, saying you're going to put someone back in for 28 days when they could have served however many months or years,
yep.
is terrible. I mean, what's the point? I mean, there's no deterrent effect at all.
It's because prisons are full to bursting.
I get that.
And so, unfortunately, the deterrent effect seems to have taken a backseat.
But why 28 days? That seems a totally pointless amount of time.
It does seem arbitrary,
to put someone back. I mean, it's such a short time.
Rather than them
why bother
serving the rest of what would have been their sentence, which is usually the penalty for breaking the terms of your licence.
Point of this. And actually, the headlines, obviously, the Mail are making hay with it, but the headline is bad for the government.
Yeah, and Baroness Newlove, the Victims Commissioner, says victims will understandably feel unnerved and bewildered. This cohort will either have committed sexual or violent offences or been assessed as posing an unacceptable risk of harm to the public. These are offenders who are serving 1 to 4 years for their original crime, being recalled to prison. Yesterday, Ayesha, we were talking about the fact that the government has ordered this review from the former Justice Secretary, David Gauke, about how on earth we deal with this prisons crisis and how we change sentencing. And then, as the Daily Mail points out, this is another story about what looks like the government having to go soft on crime because there's no room to put prisoners behind bars.
Well, let's take a step back from this and look at the criminal justice system as a whole. This, and I agree, this is very concerning. I know Baroness Newlove very well. I have a huge amount of respect for her. She's an absolutely incredible campaigner for victims. We have a criminal justice system which is absolutely broken at every single level. Whether you're looking at the court backlogs, now people are having their trials scheduled, some of them for 2028, because there's such a big backlog in the courts. The prisons are absolutely full. The police have been hollowed out. We've talked about this a number of times. Every bit, the probation service is on its knees. Every bit of the criminal justice system is broken. And I'm afraid that the Conservative government, one of the worst... You know, no, Kwasi, please, let me finish my point. Okay. This is a fact, OK? The fact is that when this government came to power, I mean, there were many difficult things, but the criminal justice system, particularly the prison service, Alex Chalk, who was the last Justice Minister, a very excellent person, in my opinion, he's a barrister, has basically said... I mean, there are hardly any places left on the prison estate. So these very, very difficult things have to be looked at. Now, I think this is a really difficult issue. I think Baroness Newlove is right. I think the victims have to be part of this. But if you take a step back, what you have to do... We cannot build our way out of this crisis.
Kwasi, a senior Ministry of Justice official said the government would run out of prison places in just 5 months' time if action wasn't taken. And therefore, presumably, they've done a calculation that those prisoners who need to be recalled can only spend 28 days in prison in order to even out those prison places.
It's farcical. I mean, what is the point of just putting them back for 4 weeks?
Well, where would you put them if there's no room?
I think there are ways that you could try and make a makeshift prison.
Right.
There are ways, you know, there are things that you can look at, given the difficulty. But just to say, well, the last government messed things up so much, so we're going to put people back for 4 weeks.
But they did. I mean,
4 weeks. But look, it's policy.
They did. I mean,
they might have done, but you can do. You have to have. Forgive me. You have to have policy.
No. Well, let Kwasi finish his point.
You had on the soapbox. You have to have a policy that deals with the situation you're in. What I'm saying is that sending someone back for 4 weeks it has no credibility whatsoever. I don't see the point.
OK, I need to come back on this. The last Conservative government built a net positive number of prison places, 500. Over 14 years, only 500 new prison places. During that time as well, the criminal justice system was hollowed out. Police were taken off the beat. Rape was practically decriminalised. And so please, I would sit this one out in terms of...
There's only so long you can blame the previous government.
But you
need to have a policy.
You've got to have a policy to deal with the situation.
But you also have to look at things in the... You can't just magic up prison places. Like, I am concerned about this.
So what would we do then?
You say you can't magic them up. I can hear our viewers screaming at the television at home. I can hear what they're saying, and they're saying, build big prisons now. You should have started the day you took office. Why don't we have more prison places? That is clearly I can hear what they're saying. That is clearly the solution.
Richard,
why do we not have an express programme to build big prisons?
They have literally just announced a programme to... They literally just announced a programme to build prisons.
And they've been in power for quite a long time.
They've been in power for 10 months. The last government was in power for 14 years.
Well, never mind the last government now.
I'm sorry, you can't...
It's acceptable.
Where do you go from here?
Do some critical thinking on this, right? You can't just magic up prison... And the other thing is, and this is the difficult conversation to have with the public, you cannot just build your way out of this crisis, right? Crime is rising.
What do you mean by that?
You cannot build prisons fast enough to keep up with the rate of people that you want to incarcerate. So you have to look at other things as well in terms of rehabilitation. You have to ask the question. And also you have to look at things like when people come out of prison. So I have done quite a lot of work going into prisons and looking at this. You've got a situation where people go into prison for the first time, and rightly so. In prison, they are becoming hardened criminals. They come out of prison, there's no housing, there's no job opportunities, they're at a chaotic point in their life, they fall back into the criminal justice system. We've got to stop this revolving door of
Kwasi, I want to ask about a separate issue, because we're discussing it this morning, and that is what's going on inside prisons.
Sure.
OK, we've all accepted there is a massive issue with prisons bursting and differing views about how the government deals with it. But the Prisons Officers Association says prison regimes must be reviewed before someone is killed in an attack. Yesterday, it was reported that a prison officer at HMP Woodhill, warning, had their throat cut by an inmate using an improvised weapon in one of 3 new attacks in high-security jails. And, of course, last week there's an investigation into the Southport killer.
Definitely.
Was said to have attacked a prison officer with boiling water. And then just weeks ago, the Manchester Arena bomber Hashim Abedi launched a brutal attack on 3 officers. So even within the prisons, there is a massive issue now about behaviour, attacks,
in a way, I think
and prison officers feeling vulnerable.
That's even more serious. I mean, why the Southport killer, who killed 3 girls under the age of 10, was allowed a kettle? I mean, it beggars belief.
In his cell.
In his cell. I mean, it beggars belief. I mean, you think this is somebody who's killed 3 girls, stabbed them, and you think, well, what's he going to do with a kettle? You might think that. But the fact that he had access to that and then could just scold a prison officer... I mean,
he threw it through the examination window in his cell door. As the prison officer looked in to check on him, he was ready and waiting, apparently. This is the allegation. And he threw the boiling water in the man's face.
But that shows to me that the regime and the access they have to, implements that can do harm is ridiculous. I mean, there's going to be a much tighter regime within the prison itself.
So there's 2 things that need to happen in this, and I've interviewed twice the head of the sort of prison association who looks after the prison staff, and he's a brilliant, obviously great kind of speaker on this. 2 things. We've got to move to almost having supermax prisons for these very, very serious offenders, right? Very serious offenders, often with ideology driving them.
They have got to be supermax prison.
So these are very, very hardcore prisons where you have a different level of security, lack of rights and privileges.
Like in America.
Absolutely right. And the Justice Secretary, in fact, with David Gott, has been out to look at these. That's the first thing. The second thing, which is absolutely imperative, there is a massive crisis with staffing in the prison service right now. What that chap said to me is morale is incredibly low. People are leaving in droves because the conditions are so difficult and so dangerous. They're not attracting people into the profession because the pay is low and it's incredibly dangerous. They would like to have things like tasers, stab vests, things like that. They have to be better supported as other bits of the criminal justice system. If you want a criminal justice system that works, you have to fund it and resource it properly.
But it's a very complicated argument, isn't it? Arming prison officers, for example, with tasers, because then you run the risk of the taser being taken from them in a struggle,
but I think
the prisoner
absolutely. But I think they would argue that they have got to be tooled up. They have got to have the resources, and this is actually something that the government is going to trial, looking tasers. But I think none of us would want. I mean, the pressure and the danger that prison officers put themselves in, particularly as we see, you know, we've just been discussing, prisons are full. There's more dangerous people in prisons. I think there's more mentally ill people in prisons in terms of the ideology. We have got to help people in prisons be able to do their job.
Kwasi asks a really good question. What are we doing allowing prisoners that most of us loosely would describe as psychopathic prisoners, access to cooking materials, hot oil, melted butter, boiling water, access to implements in kitchens which can be fashioned into weapons? What are we doing?
Well, they shouldn't
Why is
be.
that happening?
They shouldn't be. And as I go about saying it, they should be looking at supermax facilities now. If you are a very clearly psychotic, dangerous, wicked person, you should not be having access to those kinds of instruments.
That two of those incidents were essentially terror-type, psychotic mass killers. And the Southport killer got 52 years. The other one is a full life tariff. They've got absolutely nothing to lose.
Yes.
They've got, there's no, you know, the downside for them is nothing. And we know that they're violent people. Yeah. So why on earth they have access to this is just extraordinary.
Yeah. Let's talk about another issue. Migration has really become, I mean, obviously, it's a huge issue for lots and lots of voters. The local elections and the success of reform seems to have prompted Labour and the Prime Minister to go in a more right-leaning, let's say, way of talking about migration. I mean, I think everybody has agreed that controls on migration have sort of loosened, particularly under the former government. I mean, post-Brexit, immigration went, you know, almost topped legal net migration, almost topped 1 million, didn't it, under Boris Johnson. Now, Sir Keir Starmer, he gave that speech, didn't he, when he talked about an island of strangers, Kwasi. And then he was challenged yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions by Liz Saville-Roberts. Now, Liz Saville-Roberts, as I understand it, is Plaid Cymru, a Welsh nationalist MP. And
she's leader of that party.
Exactly. Let's have a look at what she said to the Prime Minister about his speech and the rather curious way that the Prime Minister responded to her. Here we go.
This Prime Minister once spoke of compassion and dignity for migrants and for defending free movement. Now he talks of islands of strangers and taking back control. Somebody here has to call this out, Mr. Speaker. It seems the only principle he consistently defends is whichever he last heard in a focus group. So I ask him, is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker.
It's good theatre, but it's hardly a logical response.
I think she made a very good point. And just from a political point of view, whatever you think about the issue, this is somebody, the Prime Minister, who has made his career as a human rights barrister. He's defended people, asylum seekers, people who should have been deported, perhaps. He's defended them.
And she's not wrong. He has backed free movement and being generous on migration.
All through his career, as far as we can see. And then now he talks about the island of strangers and what people like Nigel Farage...
And dismisses what she says as rubbish.
That's right. So this is the political difficulty he's in. To the right, who want tougher controls on migration, he doesn't have the credibility because of all the things he said before. And to the left, his language is now essentially betraying what they believe in. And it's very difficult to see in this debate who he's appealing to.
It's true, isn't it? He has actually, he's kind of destroyed his own attack line on reform, hasn't he? Because if he attacks reform and their statements and policies on immigration, they're just going to throw it back at him.
Well, I think it's not so much that I think he's can't attack reform. It's more that I think what is difficult is that the public are sending such a clear signal that immigration is an issue for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people out there are not racist. What they are is concerned about the levels of migration both the small boats, which has become... I mean, actually, the small boats is quite a small number.
Yeah.
However, it's become incredibly totemic and incredibly symbolic of everything that's going wrong. And then they see legal migration shooting up as well. And I think a lot of people...
except that in the past couple of years, legal migration has actually come down.
Yes, I know, but I mean post-Brexit, as you just said yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I think what people feel anxious about, and this is something, certainly when I've gone out door knocking across the country or for my own listeners on my radio show, what you hear is people understand that immigration has been beneficial for this country. We speak as the children of, visibly, the children of immigrants here. But what people are concerned about is in terms of planning, in terms of resources, in terms of housing, even though, of course, immigrants make a huge contribution to things like the NHS. But what you cannot deny, and I understand there's a huge amount of heat around this, is a very difficult issue. There are real concerns in the public. I think what Keir Starmer's trying to do, and in the white paper, there were some interesting policy ideas, difficult, but discussions around immigration are always framed by two extremes. Either people say you're racist if you want to have any discussion about controls on immigration.
Are people still saying that, do you think?
Yes, on the left, yes, they are.
Still think that's
absolutely. Absolutely. And then on the other side, there's people who say, we want no immigration, all immigrants are terrible, you know, anybody who is particularly like us, who are people of colour who are immigrants, are criminals or we're Romans. It's too extreme.
I have a slight I mean, I think this has become a massive issue in the last 5 to 10 years. Because, you know, and the point that Nigel Farage makes, which I think is a fair one, is that from 1949 to 2000, the average was about 50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands.
That's right. David Cameron's pledge was that immigration would stay under 100,000.
And then it went up 10 times. And it's the question of numbers and the way that communities have been changed very quickly that annoys and upsets a lot of people.
But I'm not sure that people trust Sir Keir Starmer's stance on this. And this was the point that the Plaid Cymru Welsh Nationalist leader
I think she made the point very well.
Is that he doesn't seem to have a belief in his own policy. If up until this point he was talking about the benefits of migration and, as you say, you know, defending human rights
He made a career as a human rights barrister,
but now
very much
suddenly is coming down hard on immigration. And she says, you just seem to have focus group policies. Sure. Basically, what she's saying is, you saw the results of the local elections, you're worried about reform, so you're going to try and fight them on something like immigration.
I agree with that completely.
Look, I think two things can be true. Of course, you have to look at you know, if you've gone through the local elections, where Labour did have a very difficult set of election results, as well as the Tories got completely hammered, it would be mad and false if you said you were not listening to the message that the public sent you. It is also true that these policies have been in development for a long time, because the one thing I will say is, this is not a new thing. Immigration, do you remember Mrs Duffy? Do you remember Mr. Immigration?
And Gordon Brown.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That was a pivotal moment in British politics. That was in the run-up to the 2010 general election campaign. Immigration has been a huge issue in British politics. It drove Brexit. So it's not like Keir Starmer is just saying, oh, let's talk about immigration because of the local elections 2 weeks ago.
About his own credibility on this issue.
But also, Kwasi, if Labour take on reform over immigration, who wins?
I think reform will win.
Absolutely.
I think if you're essentially repeating the talking points of the other party, people are going to say, well, why should we trust you?
Which is what the Tories did, and that's what happened with the Tories.
We've got about 3 minutes left. Serious question this. How much damage do we think that Prince Harry and his uncle, Prince Andrew, are doing to the monarchy? Because there's a popularity survey that's just been published. Harry's popularity has gone down to 27%. I mean, that's really low after that BBC interview a couple of weeks ago where he just moaned on. His uncle is only seen by 5% of the public in any positive way. 85, 90% people see him absolutely negatively. Now, that's kind of bad news for them, but how much damage do you think their behaviour, their actions, what they say is doing to the monarchy?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I'd be really wary about putting Prince Harry in the same bracket as Prince Andrew. The scandal with which Prince Andrew's name is associated is a horrific one. That poor woman, Virginia Giuffre, just took her life recently, and we know the long tail of sexual abuse, and her case was linked to Jeffrey Epstein, and his name is forever inexorably linked with Prince Andrew. So I think they are two different categories. Prince Harry has definitely fallen out of public favour, but he had a big spat with his dad. And his brother. I think the two things are not comparable.
Totally, but I think what Richard's referring to is this popularity poll, which inevitably puts all of the royals.
But the poll reflects that. I mean, Andrew's on 5%, and Harry lower low. It's 27. It's much higher, so it reflects that difference.
Yeah.
I think Harry hasn't done any favours with the interview. I mean, I saw the interview.
That's what's extraordinary,
I didn't
this interview.
really get the point of that.
Yeah, well, he was talking, wasn't he, about this case where he said he needed security.
That's right.
When he comes back
Yeah, but then he
UK.
ranged across a whole bunch of other stuff, and he talked about the King's health, which I thought was completely outrageous. And it just seemed like...
because he implied he had inside information.
Oh, the whole thing was...
About how things are going for
I didn't understand why he did that.
No.
And I think he was trying to court some degree of sympathy, but I think that backfired.
I guess the problem for him, and to some extent for Meghan, is that they're famous for not taking advice. They don't ask for other people's advice and opinion, so they act off the hoof. And that interview came across, didn't it?
Sure.
Very much as an impromptu, unthought-through exercise in bad PR.
It was very bad, and I think, you know, when talking about anybody's health is a real, you know, it's a no-go area. So when he was speculating about, you know, his own father's health, I just thought that was a red line that he crossed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think he's in a difficult spot because, you know, he is, you know, thousands of miles away from his family.
Yeah.
And I think he, you know...
Well, that's self-exile.
It is, but I think there comes a point where he's probably thinking about coming back.
You know, we in the media have to also look. As I said earlier, I think what Prince Harry's had a big fallout with his family, which is very sad. What Prince Andrew's been involved with is absolutely horrific. Okay? But I just think as well, I think we also have to sometimes respect. This is probably personally very difficult for them to be estranged from your family is horrible. I think it's really probably sad for the King as well.
Totally.
And I think sometimes, you know, we're picking at a wound here. We get that the family has had this horrible bust-up. We get it's really painful.
It was Prince Harry who did the interview, Ayesha.
I know. But it was like 2 weeks ago. It was like quite a long time ago. It was like
Very quickly, guess who is the most popular in the royal family right now? Do you think it's the King or do you think it's his son, William? It's William.
William, yeah.
It's William and Kate are the most popular royals. About 70-odd%. The King is about 60, 69%.